next speaker, that is Dr. Jayanti Gupta. Dr. Jayanti Gupta is a consultant statistician for the pharmaceutical.
Okay, is it visible?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So thanks to Parul and Nithiya and everyone at Algorix for organizing this and giving me this invitation to speak today. And I thank all of you in the audience for taking out this time on a weekend to participate in this webinar. One disclaimer that I would like to make at the beginning of my presentation is that this talk is not a very statistical talk, although it does have a fair amount of statistics in it. We will begin by looking at some sobering statistics on the cancer burden in India today, some of which you are, I'm sure, aware of, and some of which was also presented at the keynote talk today. But still, it is very important to keep this in perspective as we go about our work in clinical development. India today has the third largest number of cancer patients after the US and China. Well over 1 million new cancer cases are diagnosed annually, and close to 1 million cancer deaths occur in this country every single year. After cardiovascular disease, cancer is the second most common cause of death in the country. And very importantly, it is the leading cause of catastrophic health expenses for cancer treatment before a person dies. So the health expenses are so huge that most of cancer patients, as we know, they are not covered by any medical insurances. So they have to make huge out-of-pocket expenses by borrowing from their friends and family, by sale of assets. The expenses that they have to make for their treatment far exceed most of usually their annual household expenditure. But whatever they can afford for this treatment usually almost always results in the death of the patients. Among women, the leading cancer today in India is breast cancer, followed closely by cervical cancer. Very important that more women in India die from cervical cancer than in any other country. Rural women are at higher risk than urban women. The leading cancer today in India, breast cancer, which is also the leading cancer of women worldwide, accounts for 25% of all cancers. It's more in urban women than in rural women in India. What is sobering is that women in India are diagnosed with breast cancer almost a decade younger than their counterparts in the West. Among men, the top cancers are lung and oral cancers, which, as you know, are a result of the widespread tobacco use in the country. Most of these cancers are usually preventable. The top cancers that we looked at among men and women, such as the breast, oral, cervical, gastric, lung, and colorectal, all of these cancers can be cured if they are detected and diagnosed early. Treatments exist, but provided these patients are able to get access to these treatments and can afford these treatments, much of the deaths that happen as a result of this cancer in India today, they could have been prevented. But unfortunately, as we know, they are not. So with this, let me move on to the next slide. Keeping this burden of cancer in India in the statistics in mind today, I will quickly take you through the journey of cancer research in India and its history. So while we know that India has the third largest number of cancer patients in India, was it always like this? Only about 150 years ago, there were actually no recorded cases of cancer in the country. There were anecdotal evidence that cancer may exist in India, but there were absolutely no recorded cases. The first first recorded case of India was by a Scottish physician by the name of William Elsley, who worked in Kashmir and Punjab. He was the first person to have reported 30 cases of cancer patients in his practice in Kashmir. They were the forms of cancer that were reported by William Elsley and some of the earlier physicians in India are hardly present in India today. One of them is called the Kangri cancer. What this Kangri cancer was that the Kangri is a kind of a pot of hot burning coal. So men and women in Kashmir used to keep this pot of hot coal between their legs in winter to stay warm. And the heat of the coal would cause lesions in their abdominal region, which turned out to be cancerous lesions. And we now know that they were a form, this Kangri cancer that was known at that time is actually a form of squamous cell carcinoma of the skin in the abdomen region. Another form of early cancer that was detected by Dr. Elmsley and other physicians at that time was called the dhoti cancer. What this was that the dhotis used to be tied by men very tightly around their waist, and the petticoats by women around their waist. This tight string around their waistline used to cause lesions on their skin, which also turned out to be a certain type of squamous cell carcinoma as we know today. Both the Kangri and the dhoti cancers hardly exist in India today, but these were the early cancers that were reported a lot during that time. The third form of early cancer, chutta cancer, as you can see by the description, is caused as a result of widespread tobacco use, which unfortunately is still in use today. Still quite widespread today. So what I'm trying to say is that about 150 years ago, although there were no reported cases of cancer, cancer did exist in India, but India was not recognized or considered as a place where cancer existed by much of the Western world. The reason for this was right up to the beginning of the 20th century. And for much of the early part of the 20th century, the Indian doctors tried hard to establish that cancer was actually present in India today, and it was an increasing burden of disease. But the reason why they couldn't convince their Western counterparts was the absolute lack of any kind of epidemiological data on the incidence and prevalence of cancer within the country. As you know, at that time, so I'm talking about over a century ago, most of the population in India lived in villages. They couldn't afford doctors. Well, at least they couldn't afford modern doctors who were trained in Western medicine. Women couldn't afford any women as a result of possibly the social stigma. They would refuse to visit any doctor at all. If at all the rural population visited doctors, they were the doctors who were only trained in traditional medicine and not in modern medicine. So these doctors were not even trained to diagnose cancer. The only time we are able to get a proper epidemiological data is when we have autopsies of deaths in patients, and these death certificates are certified by trained medical professionals who can recognize and diagnose cancer. All of that was completely absent in the country. So for a very long time, up until well into the middle of the 20th century, most of the world did not take cancer incidence in India seriously. Yet any survey that was done among doctors in teaching hospitals continued to reveal that cancer had an increasing burden in the country, although the West failed to recognize that the seriousness of the issue here. So then what happened after that? The breakthrough in establishing cancer as a disease of serious concern and the required treatment happened in 1931 when Sir Dorabji Tata, the well-known industrialist of the Tata family, he lost his wife to leukemia, and he established a trust, the Sir Dorabji Tata Trust, to research cancers. Based on the funding of this trust, the Tata Medical Hospital was founded in 1941 in Bombay. This was a monumental event. The founding of the TMH in Bombay was a monumental event for three very different reasons. One was that it established oncology as a specialty in India. So with the foundation of the TMH in Bombay, patients could now had an official medium to seek qualified care. It promoted cancer research, and most importantly, oncology was now recognized as a specialty, both for patients and physicians in the country. The formation of TMH and the pathology lab in TMH led to the foundation of the CRI, or the Cancer Research Institute, in 1952, which also promoted and established more research institutes around the country. The CRI also, the second and third cancer research institutes were established in Kolkata and in Madras shortly after that. But what was still lacking was the research that was promoted by CRI and the cancer research institutes was still focused on cancers that were unique to India, like the Kangri cancer and the Dhoti cancer, which did not occur in any other part of the world. Yet the increasing cancer burden, or the cancers that were common in India at that time, were breast cancer, oral, uterine, skin, stomach, etc., which were the cancers which were common in the Western world as well. So although the cancers common in the Western world were also the cancers that were common within the country, the focus of the research in the initial years at the TMH and the CRI was still on cancers that were unique to India. And these were the cancers that our Indian physicians spoke about at conferences, and a lot of the funding was spent on research of these unique cancers rather than what was the real need on the patient burden at that time. Some of the initiatives taken by the CRI were public health campaigns launched to raise awareness and find the stigma and the superstitions, some of which probably still exist in some part of the country against cancer. Some of the good things it did was led to establishment of more public health registries across the country. The first public health cancer registry, which was established in 1963, this was also in Bombay, and eventually in a few other. So what these public health cancer registries did was they now formally collected epidemiological data on the incidence, prevalence, and mortality of cancers, restricted possibly to the hospitals and the cities in which they were established. But eventually in 1982, the National Cancer Registry Program was established to look at this to look at establishing the reach of these registries at a more national level, and to collect data on the very specific types of cancers afflicting each region and each state. This was very important from a government perspective, because to allocate resources for research and treatment, and to decide which are the regions where we need to open more facilities for treatment and research, etc. But even then, even today, some of the very populous and lesser developed states, for example, Uttar Pradesh and a few regions in the Northeast as well, there is still very little population-based data, and there is not much known about the type of cancers that are more prevalent and incident in those regions of the country. So a lot needs to be done, yet there has been some amount of development in terms of over the last 150 years in terms of understanding, recognizing cancer as a disease, understanding the spread of the disease, and devoting government funding to attack this disease. So where are we now in terms of cancer research in India? We have seen that the government we know that the government institutes and the research center facilities, the main cancer hospitals, are all located in the very large cities. But let us see the spread of cancer research in India today in terms of preclinical research as well as eventually the clinical research. So today, many universities, pharmaceutical colleges, medical colleges, and research centers are involved in preclinical research, with some of which have active international collaborations as well. These preclinical researches are focused on new drug discovery, evaluation of etiology, characterizing the molecular pathways, evaluating anti-tumor activity of both synthetic products and herbal products. and sometimes even the research into drug repurposing of existing drugs for certain cancers and repurposing them for other cancers as well. So if you look at the map over here, you will see that these are not necessarily all the larger towns and cities where the major cancer research hospitals are. They are fairly located all across the country, wherever, mostly in regions where we have good research universities and pharmaceutical colleges. What I have tried to show in this map here are the different types of cancer into which the preclinical research. Now, this map is a snapshot from 2 years ago. There are obviously more research centers across the country where preclinical work is done, but this is just to give you an idea of the spread of the research centers across the country and the different types of cancers in which active preclinical research is currently happening. Yet what is important to note is that there has not been much success yet among the research work that has been done in these preclinical centers to advancing molecules into the clinical development yet. So while it is good that we do have a lot of centers doing active preclinical research, we still have a much longer way to go in bringing the molecules discovered at the preclinical stage into the clinical stage, take them through clinical development, and eventually see how much of it translates into being available in the market. Finally, I will take you through the status of cancer research in India today, where clinical development is concerned. Now, since most of you in the audience are clinical research professionals, you would probably be aware to some extent about how much clinical research work is done in India today. Just to give you some statistics. Now, India, as we know, has the 20% of the global disease burden. This is not just cancer, but all diseases together. But only 2% of global randomized clinical trials are currently being conducted in India. The statistics on cancer is also kind of similar to this. So although we have such a large disease burden, not much, very little is in terms of actual clinical research is being currently done in India. There are many reasons for it. But one of the reasons why this is looking better is over the last few years, the regulatory landscape in India has been more favorable and more conducive to conducting clinical research. So organizations and companies doing clinical research in other countries are currently, they have a more, the chances of getting approval to conduct part of their clinical development in India is also increasing because the Drugs Controller General of India is now has more favor, now looks at such clinical research more favorably, and a large part in many of these clinical trials, especially in oncology, India is active part of clinical development of the phase 2 and phase 3 of these of the oncology drug development. One important aspect here to note is that we talked a lot about registries earlier, registries to detect and map epidemiological disease burden of cancer. There's a very important registry that was launched in India, the Clinical Trial Registry of India in 2007. What this did is it made registration of all kinds of clinical trials. Any clinical trials on human beings is now mandatorily needs to be registered in the CTRI database, irrespective of whether it is an interventional study, an observational study, a post-marketing study, or even a bioequivalent study on healthy volunteers. Any research conducted by any company or any individual, any research hospital currently needs to be launched in the CTRI database, which makes it easy for us or easy for anybody to understand how the how much clinical research is currently being done. So the data I have here is actually the data as of yesterday. In the CTRI database, there are currently 435 oncology trials which are ongoing, meaning either recruiting participants or about to recruit participants. Out of these 435 oncology clinical trials registered in India today, 22% of them are by global pharma companies. 14% of them are by Indian pharma companies, and the rest of them are by research hospitals, medical colleges, and even private hospitals and clinics today are undertaking clinical research in oncology, as we look at by this, as we can see from this data. Much of the clinical research in India today is in the development of new drugs, new indications for existing drugs, fixed dose combinations of existing drugs, adjuvant therapies, and also trying to bring generic drugs into the market by assessing their equivalence to the innovator drugs. The majority of clinical research, oncology clinical research being done in India today are in breast and in non-small cell lung cancer. I think this is the data that we have worldwide as well to a large extent. And that is followed by prostate cancer, colorectal and ovarian cancers. One thing to note here is that while research is obviously very important, it often offers a last hope to many cancer patients who have tried all existing therapies and who have relapsed on existing therapies. So participating in oncology clinical trials in India and elsewhere often offers a last hope to many such patients for last hope for survival and treatment. So this pretty much brings me to the end of my talk here. I have here some references of some of the papers and publications from where I got some of the data for this talk. Would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jayanti. Since we have a time constraint, so we would move on to the next speaker. We would not be taking any questions because of the time. So thank you again for your insightful information.